Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Mr. DeGood. The congressional district that I serve covers the pretty much the entire northwest corner of the state of Illinois, also going into central Illinois. So our western border of this district is the Mississippi River, and through the southern part of the congressional district I serve is the Illinois River. We also have 8 locks and dams. So, and by the way, on a personal note, my front yard is the Mississippi River. So I think that inland waterways are often overlooked, but are so critical, not just to the district that I serve, but also to our entire nation. The Upper Mississippi River System is the only river system that Congress has designated as a nationally significant transportation corridor and nationally significant ecosystem. I really appreciate what you said in your testimony, where you stated the Corps must stop treating the environment as a separate business line. I applaud that. A great example of the type of innovative project that you're describing is NESP, the Navigation Ecosystem Sustainability Program. It was authorized to modernize 7 locks and dams along the upper Mississippi while also providing critically important ecosystem restoration. So, Mr. DeGood, can you please speak to the magnitude of investments needed on both inland waterway infrastructure and ecosystem restoration? That's part one of my question. And part two of that is, do you think that Congress should be using this large scale dual purpose model more often?
To your second question, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really interesting about NESP is that they took a system-wide approach, right? And so often when we look at the kinds of planning the Army Corps does, it's through a narrow lens of a particular project in a very specific geographic area, and sometimes it sort of misses the forest for the trees, if you will. I would just note that currently there are 15 lock projects with an estimated total cost of roughly $7 billion that have completed all of the studies and reviews and are ready to be constructed as soon as Congress appropriates the funding. Completing these projects will improve overall system efficiency by reducing unplanned lock outages and expanding system capacity, thereby allowing tow operators to move goods to market more quickly, more cheaply, and just as importantly, with greater predictability. So, as I alluded to earlier, I think part of it is about education, because again, not a lot of folks think about the inland waterway system, but for members such as yourself that have it in their district and understand how vital it is to the environment, to recreation, but also critically to commerce, we just have to keep making that case and make sure it gets its fair share of a recovery package.
All right, very good. You also said in your testimony, you referenced the 2019 flooding along the Mississippi River. Devastating doesn't even begin to cover those events. They really were catastrophic. And this is something again that I could see in real time. For months, the locks and the locks along the Upper Mississippi were closed. As you know, that literally stopped in its track the movement of goods. Not to mention the property damage and the impact to the growing season for our family farmers all over our region. And while Congress passed hundreds of millions of dollars for emergency operations like dredging in early June of 2019, the allocation of funds took months. And so while relying on the emergency funding is never the ideal scenario to be in to begin with, is there a better way to streamline the process to get our communities relief faster in these emergency situations?
That's a great question, and one I'm not sure I have a particularly good answer for. I would say, in deference to the core, when you're talking about destruction on that scale, trying to figure out the process and the sequencing of what you can do with the money that Congress has allocated is not something I think that can happen maybe as quickly as we would like. I do think, though, that the project I referenced in my testimony points to a longer term issue of the flood control works that were built earlier in the 20th century don't really fit the kinds of hydrological cycles that we're experiencing now and which we're modeling to experience more frequently in the future. So I think the question is, are there places where we can go in and make improvements to the system so that it has a greater flood stage capacity, so that we're less likely to have the kind of disaster scenarios that were experienced in 2019. And that again comes back to we have to be proactive and say, let's not just build things the way they were done in the 30s and 40s. Let's think about ways that we can make the system more resilient, but also far more, have better environmental performance overall. And that, of course, touches on the very politically sensitive issue of buyouts. And that's why it needs to be an inclusive process and one that happens over time to bring landowners in so that they understand the vision that the Corps and state and local authorities have and can become comfortable with what the proposals are.
Thank you, Mr. DeGood. My time has expired, and Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your faithful attendance and